How is everybody tonight? Thank you for coming out on a brisk Sunday evening. We really appreciate it. We have a number of sponsors that we'd like to recognize before we get going. Yeah, come on in. There's a lot of people still coming in, so feel free. Without these sponsors, you'd probably be home watching 60 Minutes right now, so I want to thank you. Our sponsors, Frank Hagelberg, Caliber Commercial Brokerage, Candace Giles, who's here tonight, Gail Allen, who's here tonight, the Frederick Douglass Foundation of New York, well represented here tonight, and Wegmans. All are very generous to help us out, get this started tonight. Also, in-kind sponsors, Ulmer's Place Travel. Jackie got our featured guest here this evening. Thank you. Pinnacle Printers, who did our programs and flyers. Insight Marketing, who designed our new logo. And, of course, the Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights Project of Monroe Community College. And they have provided the room tonight, so we want to thank them. Also, tonight's interpreter, Norm Emmendorfer, thank you. And we want to first get started. First, remind you to turn off the sound on your cell phones. That would be very helpful. And we'd like to bring up Chloe Vizana from the project we just mentioned, who's going to tell us about what they do here on campus and in the community.
Hello, my name is Chloe Vizana. I am president of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights Project here on campus. Just going to talk to you a little bit about what we do on campus. Our three goals of the mission is to advocate, commemorate, and educate. We do a lot of educational programming through school, through different events. We advocate for those whose human rights have been taken away from them and cannot advocate for themselves. And also we commemorate the Holocaust, the victims of the Holocaust, through our annual Yom HaShoah commemoration. So, thank you.
I'd also like to thank Charlie Clark, who leads the project here, for helping us get this organized. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. So you might be wondering who we are and how this all came together. Rochesterians for Israel is a new group. We're only 5 months old, but our mission is simple. We address the negative bias towards Israel. We expose the rising tide of global anti-Semitism, and we promote Israel's right to exist. Yeah, no, thank you. We are individuals united for that common purpose. There are those in our group and among you who are more hawkish than others when it comes to Israeli and American foreign policy. There are those who support Israel for biblical reasons. Some of you may be focused on the situation in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Others draw their attention to the geopolitical implications of the Arab Spring, the ongoing violence in Syria, or the scourge of terrorism. But in the end, we all want peace. We are not affiliated with any other organizations or religious institutions. We are individuals. Okay, so Rochesterians for Israel will be hosting educational events periodically, and we invite you to take part. So let's begin with the testimony of an esteemed Holocaust survivor who is with us today from the New York City area. Irving Roth was born in Czechoslovakia in 1929 and was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau at age 14. Mr. Roth edited and coordinated the publishing of a book titled Adopt a Survivor, An Antidote to Holocaust Amnesia. He and his son, Rabbi Dr. Edward Roth, co-authored and published Bondi's Brother, a book about his experiences before, during, and after the Holocaust. And we have a limited number of copies here tonight that you can purchase afterwards. He has received numerous honors for his work in Holocaust education, including the Spirit of Anne Frank Outstanding Citizen Award. Tonight you will hear his heart-wrenching testimony and his perspective on the state of Israel today. So first we're going to start watching with a short video. It's about 8 minutes long. We're going to see Mr. Roth's showing students around the death camps in Auschwitz and his experience over there. So we're going to start the video now. Thank you.
Between 1941 and 1945, 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazi regime. A small percentage of Jews survived the Holocaust. Irving Roth is one of those survivors. He recently led a group of students through a Holocaust Remembrance Tour in Poland.
Well, I'm doing this because it is now almost 65 years since the flames of Auschwitz were extinguished. Yet I want to make sure that the world, not just in the world in general, but specifically individual human beings, students, understand what took place. I would just like to point out a couple of things here. One of them, if you see right here behind Avi, you're looking at the heating system. This is what provided heat. This is a damp, cold, miserable part of the country. This is, just looking at it, something on the order, the width of this thing is on the order of a king-size bed. 10 women were often inside in this space.
The fact that Jews wanted to leave. In fact, by 1940, half the Jews of Germany have left. Why? Because they saw. The problem was that there was no place to go. In 1938 September, there's a conference in a place called Avia. There are 36 nations sitting there, looking at the problem of immigration, of refugees. Already in 1938, you're talking about people wanting to leave. Only one country is willing to take up to 70,000 Jews, the Dominican Republic. Here is the world looking at the problem and saying no. And precisely because of that, Adolf Hitler takes the hint. Nobody wants the Jews. You recognize the sinister nature of Nazism. When the death camp of Sobibor, 12 people escaped. They were caught and brought back to the camp, and they were to be executed. Whereupon Stengel, who was the commander, says to these 12 people, he says, I am very humane. I don't want you to die alone. Here are 600 people. Choose one for each one of you to die together. And obviously, there's kid in his face. He says, okay, I'll tell you what. Since you won't choose one, I will choose 5 for each one of you. Now what do you do? You choose one and play God, or 5 people are dead.
The facade was there to the limit, the last minute. In fact, when the selection took place and people who are going to die are then, or I shouldn't say die, wrong word, murdered, are get close to the gas chamber, there are a set of steps going down and they go into a room, and in this room there is nothing except for places to put your clothing. Hangers on the wall. Hooks. The hooks have numbers on them. What do they say? Make sure you remember the number of the hook that you put your clothing on. So that when you come back, a tall person won't take a short person's clothing. Make sure you tie your shoes together in some way, because you don't want a mismatched pair. And as they turn around, what do they see? A sign above a door. Bathhouse. And so they walk in. They're given a bottle of soap. There are shower heads in the ceiling. All that to ensure that there is no panic.
And you would think that the people who volunteered for this kind of stuff were some wild animals. There were farmers and there were doctors. There were teachers and there were lawyers. Ordinary. And that's the frightening part. Ordinary men like you and I perpetrated these crimes, these heinous crimes, because they were taught that I was not a human being. I as an individual and I as a group was a demon. And you hear it long enough, the other person becomes a demon. And that's the ultimate danger of propaganda. That's the ultimate danger of education without morality. This was not a virtual simulation. This was not a reproduction. These doors on the 5 crematoria saw the dead bodies being burned. The manifolds in the back of it provided the air necessary for a quick and efficient way to burn the bodies. The tons of ashes behind us, they are the people. They are the individuals, whether they be tall or short, young or old, who cry out to us. Let this ash, let these doors, this manifold, the witness, the physical witness, tell you, do not forget, and tell your children about it.
I was standing there on the ramp over there where the trains were unloaded, the boxcars were unloaded, and the prisoners helped other people get off the trains. I thought of my own family, my brother, my mom, my dad, my grandparents being taken off the train too, being examined to see if they're too old, too sick to keep living or not.
History books can't teach this. The internet can't teach this. Pictures, as horrifying as they are, they can't teach this because you're here and it's just real.
Well, coming here, I was heavy, came in with a heavy heart, and leaving here, I leave with an even greater burden, I feel like, and that is to simply tell the story about what happened here, to never let it happen again.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Irving Roth.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out on a Sunday night. Tomorrow morning you have to go to work or to school. So I appreciate you coming out. I was on that train for 3 days and 3 nights. Stuffed together with 90 other people, no place to sit, no windows, no bathrooms, just buckets. The train stops. The doors are slid open, I jump off the train. I want to be out of there. The smell. I couldn't take it anymore. I jump off the train, and as I look around, I see guards all over the place with submachine guns and dogs, yelling at us, "Heraus! Mach schnell, get out quickly! Take nothing with you. Form lines." In the distance, flames coming out of chimneys. My brother's on one side, my grandfather, my aunt, my 10-year-old cousin on the other side. Suddenly I face a man in uniform who looks at me for an instant of time, waves his riding crop, links to the left. My brother to the left. My grandfather, my grandmother, my aunt, my 10-year-old cousin to the right. They're marched off to those buildings with the flaming chimneys. 24 hours after we arrived in Auschwitz, the 4,000 people stuffed in these boxcars, in these cattle cars, arrived in Auschwitz on that night. 24 hours later, 300 of us were still alive. My grandmother, my grandfather, my aunt, my 10-year-old cousin. Smoke and ashes. How is it possible that in 53 days, 437,000 Jews from Hungary were put into trains and arrived in Auschwitz? Most of them within 24 hours were smoke and ashes. And mind you, this was all orchestrated by very few people. All Germany had in Hungary at the time was Adolf Eichmann with 250 members of the Gestapo. That's it. Because they were totally and completely supported by every part of the Hungarian police. The same police, the same friends and neighbors who are living with the Jews for centuries. In fact, my father, who was born in 1896, became a second lieutenant at the beginning of World War I, and he was in the trenches with his friends, fighting against Russia. They spent 3.5, 4 years in the trenches together, came out. My father was decorated as a major in the Austro-Hungarian. In fact, I remember the picture that was hanging in the bedroom in our house, a huge picture of my father with all these medals. One day he tells me all these medals, why he got them. I say, how about this one? He says, oh, this one's very special. I say, what's so special? This particular medal was pinned on my chest by no other than Franz Joseph, the emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. My father, a patriotic Hungarian. He was discharged in 1919. 25 years later, his comrades in arms shoved me into the cattle car. How is that possible? How can society be transformed this way? My friends, it's very easy. One word totally describes it. Demonization. Propaganda and appropriate education can turn moral, God-fearing, religious people into monstrous murderers. The propaganda is marvelous. All you had to do is ascribe characteristics to Jews that were horrible, inappropriate. They were usurers, they were abusers, and you name it. The Jews were at fault for everything, including, as Adolf Hitler himself said, including World War I, including the fact that Germany lost World War I, because they were betrayed by the Jews. My father betrayed Germany. Unfortunately, all this is wrong. It's the first step of the Holocaust. It's the first step of every genocide. You demonize the other. And of course, it followed a very prescribed pattern. Demonize, isolate, economically oppressed. Eventually, put them into cattle cars and murder them. I'm an eyewitness to this step-by-step process. I was born in 1929 in a country called Czechoslovakia, which incidentally no longer exists. Today it's called Slovakia and the Czech Republic, as you know. Czechoslovakia was basically formed in 1918 after World War I for the first time, but it modeled itself very much on the American concept of democracy, freedom, equality. So here I am. I'm born in 1929. By 1935, I am 6 years old. I start school in a small city. Total population of the city, about 7,000 people. Jews and Catholics and Protestants and Russian Orthodox, all living together. I went to public school. I had friends who were Catholics, who were Russian Orthodox. In fact, I'll share with you a very early stages of my life. The first day going to school, I saw, before I got out of my house, I saw a young lady go to school. I thought she was the prettiest thing ever lived. And so I watched her go by, and lo and behold, she's in my class. That's a good sign. And so after a few weeks, I got up the nerve to say hello to her. He says, oh, by the way, you live... I said, yeah. He said, is it okay if we walk together? Well, by the end of the first year, I carried her books. By the time I was in the second grade, we did homework together. She happened to have been Greek Orthodox. Did it matter to me? No. I played on a soccer team. And up front, I will tell you that I'm very proud of my ability to play soccer in those days, a little later. In fact, as a by the way, when I came to the United States, I started high school. And I was the captain of the soccer team. And I learned something about America very early. There's nothing better than being a captain in a school of an athletic venture. It's fantastic. I never had a problem with the date. Amazing. So for you young people, I'm suggesting you listen carefully. You want to get along in this world? Become a captain of a football team or soccer team. And so I live in this city, in a house with my father, my mother, my older brother, 3 years older than I, and my grandparents. Incidentally, my grandfather owned the house. And for the young folks, I will tell you, there's nothing greater than having your grandparents, particularly grandfather, living in the same house with you. And the reason that's so wonderful is because, you know, sometimes you want something. You want an iPod? iPod 5, is it? No? Your parents will tell you, you have one already. It's only 1.5 years old, right? Parents can be difficult that way. Not a problem. Don't argue. Go over to your grandfather, tell him how much you love him. It works. So here I am living in this ideal place. Live in a house, play soccer, go to school. In a totally integrated society. The total population, by the way, the whole time was 7,000. We were about slightly over 2,000 Jews. Living together, working together. My father and mother, of course, had friends. And some of them were Jews and some of them were Christians, and together. Beautiful. Unfortunately, the world did what it did. By 1938, part of this country called Czechoslovakia was occupied by Germany. Remember the word Sudetenland? The southwest of the Czechoslovak Republic? Occupied. How did it happen? Well, Adolf Hitler, the dictator of Germany, said to Chamberlain and Daladier and Mussolini, give me this piece of land or else we're going to have World War II. So he appeased him, they gave it to him. But as you know, blackmailers and dictators are liars.
Right.
6 months later, the German army marched into half of Czechoslovakia and occupied it without a single shot being fired. Why? Because the Czechs could no longer defend themselves because they already occupied the defensive lines already, because they were already inside Czechoslovakia. Half of Czechoslovakia is gone. Where I live is a new country. It's called Slovakia. And when you have a new country, you have to have a new government. Unfortunately, the anti-Semitism of Germany, which we all are familiar with, I am sure, now is transferred to another place called Slovakia. And the Jewish laws. I don't know much about laws. I mean, if I ask a 10-year-old over here and say, tell me, what did the Congress of the United States discuss today? The answer is nothing. So how did I know? Well, first step, summer of 1939, school is finished in June. I do what every other kid does in small cities and towns throughout the world. You get together with your friends every day and you play, and that's what you do. You play soccer and you play all kinds of other games and so on. So this morning in the summer of 1939, I get up, I get dressed, off to go. I get to the gate of the park and there's a big sign, a new sign says, Jews and dogs are forbidden to enter. I've been playing that part for a long time. I can't go in. I'm beginning to feel that like I'm separated from my friends because my non-Jewish friends went right in. I couldn't because I was a Jew. Step by step. A few weeks go by and suddenly Jews are no longer allowed to be outside on the street after dark. The winter of 1939 comes along, and one day my father tells me, the jacket you've been wearing, that fur-lined jacket, the sheepskin jacket, can't wear it anymore. Not only that, you must deliver it to the police department. I said, my jacket. Well, this government in Slovakia decided to define things like any luxury that they define, like a gold ring, gold earrings, a fur coat, or any jacket which has a fur lining in it is a luxury, and therefore Jews are not allowed to have it. Imagine being 10 years old, having a jacket, and somebody says you can't wear it, not because you have done something wrong, because of who you are. When I was born, I was the second child. My brother was 3 years old. And my parents, I guess they must have read Dr. Spock before Dr. Spock came out. Realized that sometimes when the older brother and the young sibling comes in, they're not crazy about the idea. And you can understand that. I mean, I can understand it now too. Like, my brother was 3 years older than I, was king of the hill. And suddenly, they bring a baby. Competition. Like, who needs it? So my parents decided that one way to alleviate the problem, reduce the tension, is they'll get a nanny for me, and therefore my mother will still be able to play with the older boy, and he'll be still like in charge. And the baby someplace in the room with the nanny. Let him take care of it. Well, it turns out I liked my nanny. And you can understand. And she was with us. I was 3 years old, 4 years old, 5. She was wonderful. She loved me unconditionally. Anytime anybody would even come close to yell at me, like my father would yell at me, because I would get into trouble. Won't discuss it too much today. And she would tell my father, Mr. Roth, don't yell at him. He's just a baby. Because by this time I'm 7 years old. I'm 8 years old. I'm still a baby. She was not Jewish. She happened to be a Catholic, and she lived in our house, and of course she observed the Catholic holidays. And I was very happy about that too, because after all, as a Jewish kid, I would get presents on Hanukkah, but I also would get presents on Christmas. So, you know, like, hey. However, at the end of 1939, this government says, non-Jewish women are no longer allowed to work for a Jewish family. As you can imagine, 1939 was not a great year for me. But that doesn't stop there. At the end of June of 1940, I get promoted to the next class, and in September, I get up in the morning, I know where I'm going, I know my teacher, I know my class, off I go. I get dressed, off I go. I get to the school, and the principal stands in front of the gate of the school, looks at me and says, Roth, you can't go in. What did I do? I didn't even throw a rock through the principal's window. We don't want any Jews in our school. Now all my friends go right in. I can't. I'm a Jew. I'm separated. Told you I was a good soccer player. So that afternoon I go and play soccer. I get to the field and the coach tells me, we decided we don't want any Jews on our team. Now mind you, that wasn't even the law. But the law, separating the Jews from everybody else, penetrates the psyche of all the people, and suddenly they want and don't want any Jews either. Incidentally, I told you about my little Greek Orthodox girlfriend. Towards the end of 1940, like in April or May of 1940, we're still going to the same class. And one day we're walking home and she says, from tomorrow morning on, I'm not going to walk with you. I say, why? My father told me I shouldn't associate with Jews because we're liable to be called Jew lovers. Mind you, I'm dumped because of who I am. Of course, I spoke primarily about my experiences, but let me tell you what happened to adults. They didn't do much better either. For instance, today I was thrown out of school. Every single Jewish teacher in the whole country was fired. And very soon, Jewish attorneys were no longer permitted to practice law. Jewish doctors lost privileges in hospitals. The economic oppression. And finally we hear a rumor. The rumor is Jews will no longer be allowed to own businesses. That's a major problem for my father. My father had a lumber business. Not like Home Depot, a lumber business. He actually produced railroad ties. That was it. One product. But of course, when you produce 70, 80, 90,000 railroad ties each year, railroad ties every year, you ship them all over Europe, it's a good business. But now the threat is there. What do you do? My father, being a rather intelligent guy, having worked and lived in this community for many, many years, for decades, had many friends, Jews and non-Jews alike. One of his very, very dear friends, with whom he used to run a company, was Albert. Albert Melesnik was his name, a very fine gentleman who worked with my father. In fact, at one point, my father and the whole family and Albert and his family lived side by side in company housing. So you become friends, and you stay friends. And so my father contacts Albert and says, you know, I have a problem. I would like to sit down and talk to you about this. He said, what's the problem, Joe? So he says, come over. So he comes over and they sit down and talk about the problem. And they come up with a very simple scheme. Transfer the company to Albert. Albert is a Christian, but Albert is a friend. You transfer the company name, you change it, you transfer it legally, you sign some papers, and poof, no problem. And so they do it. Albert, for all intents and purposes, becomes his rescuer. 3 months go by, and Albert comes to see my father. He says, Joe, we need to talk. I say, what's up, Albert? He says, oh, we're partners. I think I'm entitled to half the profits. And 3 more months go by, and Albert shows up with the books under his arm. He says, I've been looking at the books, Joe. I like the way you're running my business. I'm not going to fire you. You can stay as a manager. But I am the owner. The profits are mine. Betrayal by friends. And so, we're in 1941. Jews have lost their businesses. Jewish doctors can only minister to Jewish patients and very few others. Jewish attorneys can no longer work. But 1941 is a critical year for the global politics. Because by 1941, Germany has expanded. And the influence and the laws of Germany against the Jews now are every place in Europe. Both by allies of Germany and countries that are occupied. Because by 1941, France is no more, Holland is no more, Belgium is no more, Norway is no more, Poland is no more. And so every place throughout Europe. So now Germany is in control not of the 500,000 Jews that used to live there, and half of them left already, but now Germany and their ideas, their ideologies are now every place. And in June of 1941, Germany attacks Russia and penetrates deeply into Russia very quickly. More millions of Jews. And so they decide to do something about it. The persecution, the economic oppression, but now it's for real. They organize 5 battalions of a group of men who can't be in the army because they're too old, like reservists, whose job it is to learn how to fire machine guns, going to villages, towns, and cities of eastern Poland and western Russia, gather the Jews together, march them out into the field or into the forest, and machine gun them. The Einsatzgruppen. The most frightening part of that is the fact that if you look at the roster of who these people were, you would think they're psychopaths, murderers. No. They were farmers, then they were pharmacists. They were teachers, then they were lawyers. Ordinary men were murdering men, women, and children for the greater glory and the purity of the Reich. Ordinary moral people became murderers. But very quickly they realized, this is not going to work. We have 11 million Jews. They're murdering them day in and day out, but how many can you murder? In the first 6 months, 500,000 Jews. At this rate, it'll take 11 years to get rid of all the Jews. And so they convene a conference in a place called Wannsee, called the Wannsee Conference. And the objective of the group of people who are gathered there, their mission is to develop and come up with a much better scheme. A cheaper, faster, more efficient scheme to get rid of the Jews of there. And so these scientists, engineers, and chemists, and military people, and transportation people are together in this wonderful villa. And the mission is very simple. Find a good, cheap way of getting rid of the Jews quickly. And so in 90 minutes, this brains trust comes up with a very simple solution. We'll build death camps. We'll take the Jews from all over Europe, bring them to these death camps. We'll build gas chambers next to it, on top of it, the crematoria. And this way, as they come in, we'll murder them in the gas chamber, we'll burn the bodies, and all we'll be left is smoke and ashes. And then they went to lunch. The whole meeting took 90 minutes. Slovakia being part of the system, they said, oh, this is good. Well, we have 70,000 Jews living here. Let's get rid of them. Because we already took everything away from them. We no longer need them. This way we'll get rid of them altogether. We'll even have their houses and their apartments. And so in the middle of the night, the summer of 1942, there's a knock on every single Jewish home in my town. Out of the 2,000 Jews, 1,800 are picked up that night, stuffed into the synagogue, and I mean stuffed, because the synagogue was not like we have in America, these huge synagogues with sanctuaries and ballrooms, just the synagogue. Maximum number of people that could possibly fit there was 500. But now there were 1,800 human beings there. Men, women, and children. With no bathrooms inside this building, because all you had is a sanctuary and a balcony upstairs. 1,800 human beings are stuffed into that synagogue for a day and a half. And to be sure that every Jew is at home, it's done on Friday night. A day and a half later, the Jews of my town, 1,800 out of 2,000, are in cattle cars, gone. Lucky for me, my father is still running Albert's business. And so He's there. My whole family's there. We don't know how long. 3 months go by, and my grandparents are arrested. We get them out, and we know it's over. Unless we do something. And so we disappear. We go to Hungary. Hungary has another idea how to deal with the Jews. They said, we won't ship them out. That's silly. Because once you ship them out, they're gone. You took everything away from them, and no more benefit. We're fighting a war. We need manpower. And so what they have done is said, we will take all the Jewish men, put them into a slave labor force, attach them to the army, and let them do all the work. The families will stay home, work hard, supply food for them, and here we have a marvelous situation. Free labor, very little food, no clothing. When the war is over, we'll take care of it. And so we managed to get that. I'm living in a small village with my brother, my grandparents. My father and mother go off to Budapest, to the capital. Why? Because my father needed a job. And he gets a job. It's 1943. By the end of 1943, the German army was no longer deep into Russia. It was already out of Russia. The Russian troops pushed them back. The American army, by the end of 1943, has occupied all of Italy. They're bombing the cities of Germany. The infrastructure is being destroyed. There's no question who's going to win the war. But there are 750,000 Jews still alive in Hungary. And so Germany, together with their friends the Nazis of Hungary, decide it's time to get rid of the Jews of Hungary. And so in 53 days, under the guidance of Adolf Eichmann and 250 members of the Gestapo, the Hungarian police, anxiously and fully cooperating to get rid of the Jews. And that is why I arrived on the balmy May evening in Auschwitz. I was lucky. I survived the first selection in Auschwitz. My brother did. Within less than 24 hours, I was no longer a person with a name. Now I was a number tattooed on my arm. I now was the property of the German government to do as they pleased. It turns out they shipped me off to work with horses. I was 14 years old. I lived in the city. I had no idea how to hitch a horse to a plow. To feed a horse, clean a horse. But I learned very quickly, because if you didn't learn, you were in bad trouble. Here I am, 14 years old, turned 15 actually. And I'm working with these huge Belgian workhorses. All that with a very meager diet. The day began at 3:30 in the morning. The whistle blew. In front of the gate. Get the horses to they're grazing. Clean them, feed them, give them water. By 6 o'clock, I'm behind the plow. The diet for the day was black coffee in the morning, some soup at noon, and a piece of bread at night. I learned how to plow the fields, I learned how to hitch a horse, and I'm trying to survive as my brother. It's tough. Very little food. You make a misstep, or even you don't, you can get hit or beaten altogether. But by the time night comes, you're tired, come back to your barracks, you get a piece of bread, you wash up, and go to sleep. Those were the good days. On bad days, we came back at night, rather than being allowed to go into our barracks, get a piece of bread, and wash up and go to sleep. We had to go to take a shower, which in itself is not bad. The problem was that when got dressed naked and you begin to walk into the shower, there would, on many occasions, there was a man in uniform, a doctor, looked at you naked and determined if you should continue to live. Right and back. I simply looked at you for an instant of time. My brother and I survived that. By January of 1945, the Russian army was 50 miles from Auschwitz. The American army was already inside Germany. One morning we get up, hoping that the Russian army will come closer and liberate us. On the 18th of January, we get up in the morning, we form lines as always, going to work ostensibly, but we're not going to work. And away from the Russian army. For 3 days and 3 nights, we marched. That march or die. My brother kept encouraging me. Keep walking, keep marching, don't even think of food, or being cold, or tired. Think of more esoteric stuff, like maybe a prayer, a psalm. And finally, after 3 days, we put it to trains, open cars in the middle of the winter. The train begins to move, we huddle together, and then after many hours, it stops. Told to get out, and we're marching again. And there it is, another camp. Camp called Buchenwald. Buchenwald was not a death camp. There were no gas chambers in Buchenwald. Trouble was, Buchenwald was built originally in 1937 for 5,000 people. At this point, there are 60,000 people there. With the same amount of food, the same kind of sanitation. When you don't eat, you get very skinny. It was so minimal, there were days where we got no food at all. Some days we got a boiled potato. On great days, we got a bowl of soup. The war is coming to an end. One day my brother is taken away, gone. I never saw him again. It's April of 1945, and suddenly one morning begin the death marches again. Each day, 8,000 people marched out. At this time, I'm down to 75 pounds, more or less. I can't march, I can handle drag myself. I keep hiding. Now this one day, the 10th of April, I'm hiding under the building in a crawl space with some of my other buddies. The guard comes with the dog and finds us. In front of the gate, with 10,000 other Jews. And while we're standing there, suddenly the siren goes off. American airplanes overhead. And they're not just going by. They're circling, they're coming back. They're bombing the cities around all day long. And I survived another day. April 11th. By 11 o'clock in the morning, there wasn't a guard in sight. There wasn't a single guard in sight, whether he be German or Hungarian or Lithuanian. Gone. 3 o'clock in the afternoon on April 11th, 1945, 2 American soldiers walked into our building. Almost black, almost white. The Messiah just arrived. They looked at us. We were in this one building, a few hundred kids, 14, 15, and 16 years old. Scalloped shuffling along. These 2 guys broke down. But of course, as soon as they realized what is needed for skeletons to get some flesh on them, you need to feed them. So they found some stuff in the commissary, particularly the one which was feeding the guards, and cooked it up, and down comes a jeep with 2 big vats of wonderful stuff. Split peas and pork. Now imagine having not seen a piece of meat in over a year, and all of a sudden, all you want is there. You figure. Not a good thing, my friends. But slowly we became used to the food. My system begins to work, and they take us out. They took all the kids out of the camp. They said, no, this is terrible. They're sleeping on the shelves. Their clothing is like dirty, bedraggled. Let's take the kids out of the camp. And so they do. They march us out of the camp, about a few hundred of us. They stop at one point and say, go inside the building. Take all your clothes off, put it in a big pile, and burn it. They disinfected us. Says, go inside. It's a warehouse of German army uniforms. Imagine a couple hundred kids, 16-year-olds old and 50-year-olds. We walk out, and they're not marching us back. They march us into a building outside of the camp, 4 stories high. 4 people assigned to each room. There's bathrooms, an elevator, food, chocolate, And every one of us got a carton of Camel cigarettes. Picture. 4 guys, 15, 16-year-olds, each holding a carton of cigarettes. I never smoked. But of course, there's always a leader, right? You know that. He said, let me show you how it's done. So he takes a cigarette out and puffs away, and so of course the second kid, that funny, I figured, get it along. Right? I take a cigarette and start puffing on it, and an hour goes by, and I say, oh my God, I'm shaking, I'm sweating, my lips are burning, my tongue is bitter, I'm going to die. I survived Auschwitz, I survived Auschwitz. Well, fortunately, an hour goes by or 2 hours goes by, it all goes away. I realize it's from the cigarettes, it's nicotine poisoning or something like that. So I said, I'm not going to smoke again. Of course, I never did. But I didn't throw the cigarettes away. I traded in for chocolate. That's another thing I know how to do, eat chocolate. Still love it. And so I'm liberated. What do? I'm 15 years old. The war is over. I decide to go back. Maybe somebody from my family. I knew about my grandparents, but I didn't know what happened to my parents in Budapest. I didn't know what happened to my brother. So I decide the reasonable thing to do is to go back to the village where I came from. And they'll be there if they're alive. And so I get there, and the first person I see, I tell him, anybody in the royal family survived? He said, yeah. I said, where? Points to a house. I run over there. I open up the door, and there is my mother. I say, hi, Mom. My mother fainted. My parents survived. They were in Budapest. How did they survive? Budapest was the last city that had Jews, 200,000 Jews, and they were being shot and shipped out and dumped into the Danube. But 3 weeks before the shipping and murdering of the Jews takes place in Budapest, my father gets sick, goes into a coma. He winds up in a hospital, non-Jewish hospital. Everybody gives up. Why is he in a coma? He's in a coma 1 day, 2 days. After a week, he's going to die. Tonight, there's a Seventh-day Adventist Christian woman who decides he doesn't have to die. In fact, every single night she sits by his bedside and talks to him. And talks. Nothing. A week goes by. 2 weeks go by. As she's talking to him one night and pinching him and moving him around, suddenly she looks at him and he says, how long have I been asleep? My father comes out of a coma. Absolutely nothing wrong with him. But the Jews of Budapest are being shot on the street. This night nurse, the Seventh-day Adventist night nurse, decides she's brought this man back to life, so therefore she wants to keep him alive. Tells my parents, if they had no place to hide, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with my daughter, who is married and has a child, and a son-in-law who's in the Hungarian Nazi army, of course, was a young man. He's not at home. My parents get to her apartment. Mind you, it's a 1-bedroom apartment. They sneak in. Police come and look for Jews. They don't find them. This goes on week after week after week. All kinds of complications with food and, when you can pull a toilet and flush it during the day because, One night, about to go to sleep, knock on the door. Into the hiding place they go. Who walks in? The son-in-law. The Hungarian Nazi soldier comes home for 3 days. As you know, the 1-bedroom apartment, 2 extra people, you can't really hide too well. So the wife decides to tell. We have these very, very distant relatives, they're not really relatives, they're sort of relatives, who are living with us. Actually, they're hiding here. You mustn't tell anybody. If you do, you'll be shot. If you want to go to bed with me tonight, keep your big mouth shut. You can imagine I have tremendous respect for sex. My parents survived. Jews survived. In Bergen-Belsen, in Bochum. What they do? They can't go back home because our neighbors and friends, when they looked at us when we came back to my town, they said, "You're alive?" Hitler did not do a good enough job. Too many Jews still alive. So the Jews who are remaining alive in most of, particularly from Poland and from the Russian area and from other countries, simply stay in Germany in the camp. It's called the DP camp, which means same camp, but now it has good food, because UNRWA and other American institutions provide it. They get clothing. They want to go someplace. No place to go. America has a quota system, the same quota system they had before there was since 1924. So Jews for 2,000 years have been praying 3 times a day, facing Jerusalem. What a good place to go. Their brethren are there. There's some people, the Yishuv, the people who live there. There's some families who live there in Jerusalem, particularly for 2,000 years. They never left. And so they figured that's the thing to do. But you see, Great Britain is occupying Palestine. They blockade. Some of you may have seen the movie Exodus. They tried to get there. But since Britain is no longer fighting a war, now they can use their warships to block Jews from coming in. The Jews who survived. And so finally, in 1947, on November 9th, I believe it was, it's an interesting time. November 9th is also Kristallnacht. The UN votes to take this piece of land, not very big, and partition it 2 pieces. One where the Jews live, mostly the Jews live, will become a Jewish state. Where most the Arab lives, it'll be an Arab state. Now, of course, to the Jews, all of Israel, including Jordan, used to be once upon a time the Jewish kingdom. Now, it's a very small piece, but that's okay. A half a pie is much better than none. And so the Jews says, great, great. And so, in May of 1948, they establish a new country, the ancient homeland for the Jewish people, called the State of Israel. Now the Jews have a place to go, anti-Semitism disappears, and the world is at peace. It's a bit of a dream, you might say. Unfortunately, that same day, 5 Arab armies attack Israel. And thus begins the saga of the Jewish people, the continuation. In fact, anti-Semitism didn't disappear. What did happen is the epicenter is no longer Berlin.
Right.
Now it's Damascus, Cairo. All that's happened is it was transferred. And year after year, month after month, there are continuous wars. The first one is 1948, 1956, 1973. It continues. It continues onslaught against the Jewish people. My cousin, who was with me in Auschwitz, is in Israel. He's 17 years old. He arrives there. It's 1948. He's 19 years old, a gun in his hand, trying to defend himself again, to stay alive. It continues. But simultaneously, not only the physical war, not only the bombs, not only the rockets, a war of propaganda begins in earnest. Today, Israel is facing an existential threat. And this existential threat comes from various places. Yes, there are those who want to destroy Israel physically. But there are others who say it shouldn't exist. The extreme left also thinks Israel shouldn't exist. There was a conference in 2001 in a place called Durban, South Africa. sponsored, it's an NGO, non-governmental agencies or organization, and is ostensibly organized by the UN to stop racism. What a wonderful idea. Unfortunately, this was not anything to stop racism. This was a hate fest against the Jews, and they come up with a new idea. Israel is an apartheid state. In fact, the UN voted at one point that Zionism is racism. I have a problem a little bit with that, with the idea of racism. You see, racism is, I was born and I'm a descendant of a group of people, let's say blacks or Hispanics. So I'm a particular race, right? The Jews are not a race. It's a mixture of all kinds of stuff. Besides that, racism means that you can, anybody who is other than me doesn't belong. Anybody who would like to become a Jew, go right ahead. You're welcome. All you have to do is observe a few laws. 613 of them, but apartheid. Why? Because apartheid took place in South Africa, and therefore it was destroyed as an apartheid state. This is perfect. You now paint the Jews with apartheid. Nothing to do with apartheid, my friends. I recommend when you're in Israel, or if you want to go there, and go into the Hadassah Hospital, for instance. Give a look who is there being taken care of. Jews and Muslims and Christians and Hindu and you name it. In the same operating room, the same doctors, the same beds. Last time I checked, that's not racism. Go to University of Jerusalem. 20% of the student body at the University of Jerusalem is Muslim. Get on a bus in Israel. Don't try to get a seat. You're right. Jews and Arabs. That's not apartheid. But you know what? Unfortunately, the media has bought into it. In fact, a new language has evolved. For instance, the former Foreign Minister of England gave a speech a number of years ago, 4 years ago or thereabouts, Jack Straw. Says one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And that was so, until when? Until the bombing of the subway system in London. Now, it's not true anymore. See, as long as the Jews were being bombed in Jerusalem or in the pizza parlor, that's what it is. There are all kinds of euphemisms, all kinds of excuses. Murder and mutilation of people like our ambassador. You know, that's because the frustration, because they don't have enough food, or whatever. When Israel goes and tries to destroy munition facilities in Gaza, oh my God, that's disproportionate response. I want to know what proportion. If you come with a gun to kill me and I take the gun away from you, that's disproportionate response? We just couldn't kill you. We buy into it. My friends, the problem is these lies, these fabrications have entered everyday language, but worse, much worse. They entered the university system of the United States and Great Britain. Professors and students have joined together to demonize the Jew. How is that possible? How is it possible that a professor of history will write a book
about the apartheid state of Israel. He's a tenured professor at the University of California. Well, it's very easy, my friend. That's very easy to do. Columbia University has also a department like that. If you go into this professor's class and you don't agree with him, you'll fail. Why? Well, imagine you're an assistant professor. That's not what you really want to be. Well, the department is, right? Imagine someone comes along and says to the dean or the chancellor or whoever is in charge, they says, I think you should have a course of study in a department of Middle Eastern Studies. No, it costs $50 million to establish a chair, or 70 or 30, depending on. Don't quote. I'll give you the money. Along comes Dubai or Saudi Arabia or some of the other states, say, I'll give you the money. I'll tell you what they're going to teach. I'll tell you who's going to be the chairman of the department. Seduction. About 100 universities in America have something called the Muslim Student Association. It sounds like a perfectly benign thing. But many of the colleges, and I visited quite a few of them, they have something called Apartheid Week. Where they erect a wall, and on this wall are paintings and pictures. And one group of students is dressed as IDF, members of the Israeli Defense Force, with fake guns. And they start making noises and firing off firecrackers, and people are falling down, and there's red paint or blood flowing to reenact what Israel is doing. This is seen and participated by professors who give speeches and getting converts, Christian converts, even some Jewish converts. Rather than talking about the truth, the fact that it's possible for two slightly different people, and I say slightly different people, to live side by side. All you have to do is not threaten. All you have to do is stop murdering. And that's the issue, my friends. Many details one can talk about. But essentially, the real problem that the fundamental concept that many of the people who are claim to be Muslims, although many Muslims will tell you they're not really Muslims at all. It's not the religion. It's not 12 or 15% of fundamentalists. The terrorists who are trying to do. Unfortunately, we have to also consider the fact that they all not only want to destroy Israel, but after all, Israel is just a little devil. I'm sure you have heard our good friend from Iran. You and I do need to go. We are the big devil. And so, my friends, we need to understand what's taking place. We cannot buy into the propaganda. Because, in fact, Western civilization is under attack. Murder has become respectable. It's moral. In the name of whatever you want. Fortunately, there are some people who realize this. There's an organization called CUFI, Christians United for Israel, who now is organizing chapters on college campuses to bring the truth out. And there are these good people here from the Rochesterians who recognize this. And so I hope, and I trust, the help of America, we will remain a society of democracy and freedom. Because Israel is simply the first line of defense. Remember I talked to you about Czechoslovakia? They were the first line of defense. Nobody cared. Did World War II happen? Did 50 million people have to die? Could have been stopped early. So my friends, we need to stop. We need to stop the enemy at the borders of Israel for us to be secure. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you everybody for coming. Mr. Roth would be happy to take some questions. If you want to just come up in the center of the aisle, we don't have an extra microphone, but if you talk loud enough, or that'd be great if people can't hear you. I'll try to repeat your question. You come up right in the middle if you have a question, and before you come on up. We also have some copies of Mr. Roth's book outside, available at the welcome desk for purchase. He would be happy to sign those. If you'd like us to keep in touch with you, please fill out the contact cards. My assistants were going to help me pass out the pens now. All right, they're over here. Where's Candy? There you go. Okay. And just leave any comments for us on the back. You don't have to fill out all the contact information. If you just want us to have your email or your phone or anything, let me know. Just put the comments in the back. And then our next event will be in January, so make sure we have your information. We'll let you know where it is and what it will be. And of course, we'll always accept donations to help us defray the costs and host events. You can leave those outside in the baskets. And who has got the first question? All right, Marisa, right here, right next to you.
Oh, hi. I just want to know, this is probably very ignorant, but I always wondered, how did the Germans know that you were Jewish?
How do you know I'm Jewish? Now, first thing I want to tell you is, in Europe, in all countries except for Belgium, when you were born, you got a birth certificate. That's what it says, your religion. Then again, of course, you also have to understand, which Americans don't always understand. In Europe, non-Jews were never circumcised. So the men were in trouble already. That's how you do. You drop your pen, then you know.
I have a question. Two things. Thank you for coming out here and
My
sharing
pleasure.
this brilliant testimony. I don't know if you know, there's a small Jewish community in Cuba, and we have a Jewish American now prisoned in Cuba for supposedly being a spy for bringing computer, like internet and stuff for that small Jewish community. Synagogues in New York City are going over there and really just going over there on those exchanges. That's one, nothing's being done. They're trying to work through the State Department, nothing. Number one. And number two, in this critical election that's coming up November 6th, what do you recommend people here to really look at? Because we have a government that doesn't really support Israel.
Well, you have to be careful. I mean, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. You're supposed to vote your conscience.
I know.
There are many issues involved. Both sides have many answers to our problems. Neither one is going to really implement anything. I'm being a little cynical. You wonder why, right? Give a look how many wonderful things have been happening in Washington in the last few years. Fact is that the United States, looking from a broad perspective, the United States has been supporting and helping Israel through all administrations. And I say all. Right now, starting I think tomorrow or the next day, there's a major maneuver taking place in Israel. 3,500 American soldiers are involved. So there may be, I don't know for sure, but I think the difference may not be so great. I don't know. The difference will take place in another generation unless we do something. And that's what the problem is. The problem is not today. Today, the major threats are there. Iran is a major real threat. The danger, the existential danger, is like 10, 15 years away. When America will be run by the kids who are today in college.
That's right.
If they buy into the demonization of the Jew, the policy of America will change. And that's what we must not allow to happen.
The largest threat is the demonization
Of course.
propaganda. that
Of course, without a
occurs-
question.
And it occurs on college campuses.
Absolutely, and that's
By far.
the issue. So the immediate, yes, there may be nuanced differences, but I think they're nuanced. You know, whether it's Republican or Democrat, I think Israel has been as part and parcel of American policy. After all, it is a democracy. By the way, let me tell you a funny story, which struck me very funny the other day. Actually, a year ago. How people perceive things. In Spain, in Barcelona, every year or every second year, there is a gay parade. Last year, Israeli gays were disinvited. Now, it's the only country in the Middle East that they say you're gay. And so people say, so what? Try to be a gay in Iran. Iran was invited. You see, propaganda.
That's sad.
Insanity. And that's the danger. The media has bought into it. The American college system is being threatened. As a, by the way, 2 weeks ago, the UC, University of California system, voted boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. University of Scotland voted the same way. It's an apartheid state. A professor at the university wrote an article. Says, you guys are off the wall. How an academic whose objectivity is supposed to be there. My friend's propaganda. And that's the real fear. All of you have children, and does anybody have a grandchild in college? No, not this few. Some of you are in college. That's where the fight is taking place. For the hearts, the souls, and the minds of the American student. And that's where the real work must take place now to ensure that tomorrow, in 2020, when the election takes place, regardless of who you vote for, will not support Israel. That's the existential. You have to do it very loud because
That's
at
okay.
my age it's hard to hear.
I can be loud.
Good. Just don't yell at me.
To piggyback off of that question, I realized as we were getting ready to come to this event that my son's generation is the last to hear eyewitness accounts. We already have people that are saying Holocaust never happened. How on earth do we counter that for their generation and their children's generation?
I recommend you, when you're at home tonight or tomorrow, go on your computer and into the address, put on adoptasurvivor.com.
Ooh.
Okay. I'm very happy and proud of that program because I invented it. So. I'm a little prejudiced that way. What's this program all about? This program puts together a Holocaust survivor and students, one-on-one, or maybe two students and a Holocaust survivor. They spend time together. They talk. It's not a lecture. It's sitting across from each other, talking. If you're interested, then there's a place you can apply for this thing. You send me an email, they send an email and, all that stuff. And you'll get a booklet. 26 pages with questions, with spaces to write in the answers. And here a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 22-year-old now suddenly doesn't just know about the Holocaust that 6 million Jews were murdered. He now knows a Holocaust survivor. So when he is an adult, in fact, one of the requirements of the program, when you sign up for this program, you sign a piece of paper. It says that you will do certain things. That's also on the website. One of them is that in the year 2045, each one of these people who adopted as a survivor must give a talk on his survivor. So that's one of the things that we're doing. We have a few thousand of these students. I just think about it in terms of you being in school today. And somebody tells you, a great-grandfather comes over and tells you, I remember talking to Teddy Roosevelt. And describes Teddy Roosevelt. You imagine walking into a classroom? You'll be able to tell your children and your grandchildren. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, fought with him, or that physical connection, that human connection. And one of the requirements, you tell your children and your grandchildren. So this way, not just simply the statistics, because we all know that all of us who write, historians and otherwise, have a bias, have an agenda and all. You don't have an agenda. You don't have an agenda. You met that survivor. And in Rochester, of course, you can do it because there are a number of survivors. Oh, by the way, if you don't have a survivor, modern technology is so phenomenal. You can do it online. In fact, the program has been running for a number of years. A number of years ago, I got an email from Australia. And sent this email to me. He would like to participate in the Adopt a Survivor program. Where do you live? In Sydney, you can get some survivors. This is not Sydney. I live in the bush. But he has a computer. So I hooked them up with somebody in Roslyn, New York, and they were corresponding to each other for about a year. So now there is a young man in the bush in Australia who can tell you about Ron Unger, the Holocaust survivor from Tarnów, Poland. He's an expert on it. It's a biographer. So the objective is to create biographers.
Amen.
We have a physical connection to the survivor. Yes, sir.
Yes, hi. I'm actually a veteran of the Israel Defense Forces, but I have a dilemma regarding Israel in the future that I wanted to...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's interpreting. So a dilemma that I just wanted to run by you. There's three different things that I believe all three can't happen at the same time. One is Israel staying as a Jewish state, number one. Number two, holding on to all the land that it now controls. And number three, continuing to be a democracy. So if we assume that we want Israel to remain as a Jewish state, the problem is that holding on to all the territories that it now has, the majority would not be Jewish. It may not be right now, and certainly going forward based on birth rates. Or the opposite is, holding on to the land, not being a democracy, or vice versa. Being a democracy, but then there wouldn't be a Jewish majority. So how does one resolve that dilemma?
Well, I tell you, I'll answer the question with, I was giving a talk at Bronx Community College. And a young man, a Palestinian, just came. He was here about 6 months and began to talk about this whole issue of the settlements and all that. That's the impediment to peace. I suggested a solution. A very simple solution. Stop throwing rockets. Let's sit down and talk. Put the borders any place you want. One will remain a Jewish state and the other one will be a Palestinian state. Now, the Jews who are living in the settlements who happens to be in the Palestinian part or Palestinian state, that's not a problem. They become Palestinian citizens. They have the same rights as every other Palestinian. What's the problem? Yes, you have to contain, because the Jewish state needs to exist as a Jewish. Why? Because anti-Semitism has been around for 2,500 years.
That's right.
And 830,000 or so Jews living in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran, and every place else had to go someplace. If it were 1940, they'd be dead. Now they're all in Israel. It's a refuge. Jewish state. And the question is, why should a Jewish state exist? For the same reason there should be a French state and an English state. Does anybody ever question whether France should be a French country? Anybody ever occurred to you to question that? So why Israel? Why the Jewish state shouldn't be Jewish? And it can be a democracy. In fact, I claim that if you really read the Torah carefully, you find that it's all there.
Can I just add one thing to that? It's one of the reasons why the rabbis did what they called building a fence around the Torah. And that's what has kept the Jewish community alive these 5,000 some odd years, 73 years.
I have a question. I think it's more of a personal question, though. You know, because how long did it take you to be able to, you know, stand up and be able to talk about your experience that you had, and especially, I guess, you know, here in, you know, like I see a lot of, you know, you said you live in New York City, and I know there's a lot of Jews that are there, and how there seems to be somewhat of a divide, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes I talk to some Jews, and they're more, I don't know, they love themselves a little bit more. I don't know how to put that, really, but you know what I mean? And then you can come out and talk about things in a way that, you know, I don't know, I don't hear a lot of times, and they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. So I just wonder what it is that...
Let me just answer one question which I know something about, having to do with Holocaust survivors. Holocaust education and Holocaust survivors did not speak for many years, for decades really. There are three different sets of people, three different reasons that you can think of. One of them is quite painful.
Right.
Because you relive and you speak about it, you see it. I see it. Physically, I see Auschwitz, I see the separation, I see all the things that in fact, the first time I went back to Auschwitz, it looks exactly like in my mind. So that's one thing. So you don't want to bring, you don't want to tell it to your children because you don't want to traumatize them. It's a bad idea. I think you should tell them. Third piece is, who wanted to listen? There was no interest. When I came to America, I was very fortunate. I was almost 18 years old, and I wound up going to school in Brooklyn. You all heard of that place. And I'm there about 6 months, and I'm a captain of the soccer team, so you know. So one of the people of the newspaper, of the school newspaper, says, you know, like, you're different, because you don't even really speak English. What you speak is sort of, who knows. So he interviewed me. So I actually was interviewed in 1948 in the United States about my experience in the Holocaust. Nobody wanted to listen. Why wasn't the American Jewish community interested? That may be many reasons. One of them, they may have felt some guilt. They didn't do a damn thing about helping him. They were fighting among each other to decide what should be done, and the net result was very little was done. Maybe. The other thing, when you really examine American policy from the president on down of the 1940s, you find that the concern about the Jews of Europe wasn't there. That is, the people who were involved in the government, including the president, the idea of the Holocaust did not bother them particularly. The Jews, by and large, are law-abiding citizens. They admire leaders, particularly FDR, who's an icon for most of the Jews. And suddenly I need to be critical of FDR? How could I be? So there's a whole slew of different reasons why that is the case. And that's the problem. Now, in terms of separation between Jews and non-Jews, there really isn't happening that much. It's a myth. You go to Long Island and you'll find that the Jews and Christians and Muslims and you name it, live together in the same community. You go together, you go to a school board meeting and everybody screams all at the same time. So this idea of this, I think it's not really, in my experience at least. Jews are involved in all kinds of stuff, in every sphere of life. And therefore they have friends who are non-Jews. Some aspects of it are even detrimental to the Jewish community because of tremendous intermarriage, which in itself has problems. And the question is, why not? Well, because I think that Judaism should survive. It's perfectly okay to marry someone who's not, but bring him into the Jewish religion. So there are more people. So, it's.
Thank you for your courage and artistry and making connections I've never had before. My question was from very early in the talk when you were 11 and you were getting to escort your girl and was told that tomorrow it wasn't going to happen. At 11, didn't you just think, who cares about my Judaism? This girl is a much bigger part of I'm just wondering what.
I get the question. What happens, you and she both are influenced by what's going on around you, what you're told by your parents and so on and so forth. And it becomes real. She no longer saw me as Irving Roth. I wasn't the same person. Because someone painted a picture of me. Someone demonized me. I was not the same person anymore. Neighbors would murder neighbors because they weren't neighbors and they weren't the same anymore. They were the other. And that's the essential problem. A number of years ago, I was teaching a course at Long Island University. And these were graduate students. And one of the people asked me, says, what do you think is an ideal society for you? My ideal society is if I can be different and not be the other. If I can belong to the human race, even though I have no hair. That's the point. We always quote the Bible, love thy neighbor as yourself, right? Well, it's easy if the neighbor is like you. That's a big deal. But the Torah also tells you, you shall love and not oppress the stranger. Over and over and over again. That's the trick. Just because you're different in some peculiar way. Look, most Chinese grandfathers look a little different than I do. My aspiration and his aspiration for his grandchildren is identical to that one. I have a tremendous amount in common with him. That's the trick. The trick is saying to yourself, I can live with other people. That is the issue. Just because because you have to understand, there's also another piece to it. You're free to do these things, but your freedom stops and the other fellow's nose begins. You know that, right? The story goes like this. The guy comes from Europe. He's finally free. Free country. Can do anything he wants. Goes over to a guy and punches him in the nose. Cop arrests him. Pulls him to court. And the judge says to him, why did you do this? It's a free country. I can do anything I want. Says, your freedom stops when the other fellow's nose begins. That's the essence, my friend. That's the essence of democracy. That's the essence of freedom. You need to respect each other. You can't go around saying, I'm gonna kill you.
That's right.
You can't do that. Just like you can, the proverbial, you can't scream in a crowded theater, fire, if there's no fire. That happens to be a misdemeanor. You're locked up for that.
We'll do one more question, and then we'll continue at the table outside.
Sure.
Yeah. No one else?
This is kind of along the same lines. I was putting myself in America, and let's say this was happening here, and I think about so many Americans are apathetic, or they just don't want to know what's going on, they don't want to get involved in anything. So if this started happening here, a lot of people might not even know. So I was thinking about when you were 11 and 12, did you question your parents? Did you ask your friends what's going on? Did you know what was going on? Did you try and figure out what was happening?
You very quickly realize what's happening. It's very simple. When I was thrown out of school, I knew I'm a Jew, and therefore I'm thrown out of school, period, end of story. So I knew, I felt that separation.
But did you say, why? Why do they want to hurt Jews? Did you say that?
That's a lecture on pizza. Because the Jews, the perception of people that Jews are different. The perception. Anybody different? And why not blame? Let's go back to Germany in 1920. Germany loses the war. Imagine you're a German. Imagine you've been a major in the German army. You're discharged. Why? Because you can't even have an army. The Versailles Treaty prohibited a large army for Germany. But here you are a major, which means that everybody saluted you, and suddenly you have no job. You're angry. Somebody tells you, don't worry, you didn't lose the war. You were betrayed. By whom? By him. By him. So easy.
All right, we'll end there. Thank you again, Mr. Ross. Appreciate it. Thank you again for coming. You can keep up with us at rockforisrael.org, and if you just fill out one line on that comment card, just how you heard about this, that'd be great, and they'll collect them outside. Thanks again.
Can I ask you a question? Okay. Yeah. All right. Hello? What's your name? What's your name?
Nathaniel.
Hi, Nathaniel. So what do you think of Urban Rock?